growing concerns. A closer look at the situation on the U.S.-Mexico border. Historic discovery. Archaeologists unearth ancient artifacts in Israel, why they may be related to the Bible. Coronavirus crisis. New developments in the status of the Vatican museums as Italy once again heightens its pandemic restrictions. And in high demand, why the Catholic schools in one diocese are looking to hire dozens of new employees. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden travels to Pennsylvania today to push the American Rescue Plan. The White House says the funding includes $28 billion to help revive restaurants, but other problems are still facing the administration. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, before President Biden boarded Marine One this afternoon, a reporter asked him if he has any plans to visit the southern border. The president said, quote, "Not at the moment." Took just one more question and walked away, headed out on his small business trip.
President Joe Biden heads out of the White House ready to talk small business in suburban Philadelphia. The White House has it plans to increase participation in COVID-19 relief programs for small business owners, bolster the Paycheck Protection Program, and help small businesses rehire and retain workers. And out west, Vice President Kamala Harris was headed to Denver to visit a vaccination site, both leaders promoting the American Rescue Plan. While on the southern border,
the smugglers' message is very pervasive. They prey on people and they prey on their hope.
A surge in the number of unaccompanied children, mostly from Central America. They can remain in the U.S. held in temporary shelters.
We have to treat people, and children especially, well, and we're moving really quickly. A request for information for additional facilities went out immediately.
Republicans blame President Biden's new immigration policies. Others angry over the administration holding migrant children in detention facilities longer than allowed. And half a world away in Tokyo, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Tony Blinken meet with their counterparts. Among the items up for discussion, North Korea and China.
China has modernized its military. In addition to that, it has engaged in aggressive and in some cases coercive behavior.
And North Korea just issued a warning to the Biden administration, saying it should refrain from causing a stink if it wants to sleep in peace for the next 4 years.
Now back to the southern border for a moment. The administration also emphasized the border is closed and they are expelling adults and families. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And coming up later in the newscast, a closer look at the situation on the border with Melissa Lopez, head of the Migrant and Refugee Services for the Diocese of El Paso, Texas. On the heels of his $1.9 trillion stimulus package, President Joe Biden is planning the first major tax hike since 1993. The increase in taxes will help pay for initiatives on infrastructure, climate, and continued assistance to America's poor. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric.
Well, Tracy, details of the proposal are still being worked on, but sources tell EWTN News Nightly that it does include an increase to corporate taxes by some 7%. Republicans say that it's too fast and will create inflation and will destroy American businesses by the year 2022. It's a spending initiative which is expected to be greater than the latest COVID relief bill, costing as much as $4 trillion.
This is entirely predictable that the Biden administration would come at us with a tax increase. But we're not out of this pandemic-related, downturn right now. The last thing you do when you're in a recession is raise taxes.
President Joe Biden's new tax plan will not just rely on government debt as a funding source, but could include an increase in both corporate and individual tax rates. The plan changes include raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, raising the income tax rate on individuals earning more than $400,000, expanding the estate tax, and creating a higher capital gains tax rate. Any tax increases included in the legislation would likely take effect beginning in 2022.
Back in 2017, when we took our corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, that put us at the middle of the pack. That made us more competitive as a nation. And suddenly we saw a tremendous increase in economic activity here in America.
And he's not alone. Financial experts say these proposals could undo the progress we saw several years ago with tax cuts.
We know from past experience that when you incentivize investment, that increases productivity of all workers, and workers, whether they're poor, middle class, or wealthy, all share in that boost in productivity.
Experts say our tax revenue is already at an all-time high, and what we have is a spending problem.
We are burdening future generations. We are printing trillions of dollars. We're borrowing and we're spending. We're already seeing an increase of inflation, and those threats are going to be elevated going forward.
An analysis of the tax plan by the Tax Policy Center found that it would generate some $2.1 trillion in new revenue over a decade. But Republicans say at what cost and how many American businesses would go under. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
The Biden administration is asking the Supreme Court to toss out a case on abortion funding. The case involves a challenge on whether the government can provide federal money to pro-abortion groups. The White House says it plans to roll back those restrictions. Experts in Israel say they have discovered dozens of new Dead Sea Scroll fragments that may be nearly 1,900 years old.
We found one fragment from the book of Zechariah, chapter 8, verses 16 to 17. We also found another small fragment from the book of Nahum, chapter 1, verse 5. These were parts of a longer scroll that contained all the 12 minor prophets.
Researchers believe the scrolls were hidden during a Jewish revolt against Rome. They are the first new fragments found in 60 years. And we'll have more on this story in the coming days. After 4 weeks in the hospital, Prince Philip has been released. The 99-year-old husband of Queen Elizabeth II came down with an infection last month. While he was in the hospital, he was also treated for a heart problem. Prince Philip retired from public duties back in 2017. This was his longest hospital stay. The Vatican Museums take another hit, closing its doors for the third time in just over a year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Tickets already purchased will be automatically refunded, and the director of the museums says research and restoration will continue. The closure follows the Italian government's decision to go into lockdown this week. It is expected to be lifted after Easter. St. Peter's Basilica has canceled private masses starting March 22nd until further notice. The Vatican Secretariat of State released a letter saying these changes are intended to ensure the holy masses in St. Peter's Basilica take place in a climate of recollection and liturgical decency. Edward Pentin, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us now. Ed, great to see you. So tell us, what exactly did the letter say about celebrating private masses in the Basilica?
Well, this came rather out a surprise, out of the blue, rather, because what this letter said is that there's individual celebrations of the Mass are suppressed. So all the masses that take place in the side altars cannot be done individually. So by priests, celebrated by priests individually rather than concelebrated. So what they're saying is that those masses in these side altars need to be concelebrated with more than one priest. It also says that one of these four concelebrated masses must take place each morning, and that they must also have the assistance of readers and cantors. But they also say that if you come with a priest or a bishop, or if a group rather comes with a priest or a bishop, they have to celebrate Mass in the grottos underneath the basilica, which is also a new development. And then lastly, the extraordinary form masses in the old rite, the Tridentine rite, can only also take place in the Vatican grottos underneath the basilica in the Clementine Chapel, which is a very small chapel, as I say, underneath the main body of the basilica.
Ed, do we know how often those masses took place? And also, do you know the reasoning for it and who was in charge of making these decisions?
Yes, well, the Masses was very free. It used to be very free. I mean, if a priest wanted to celebrate Mass in one of the side altars, he was free to do so. But now there is these restrictions, as I say. But yes, this is certainly a change, and I think people aren't quite sure why. But I understand that this has been pushed for some time. Even going back to John Paul II's time, there was an effort to enforce these concelebrated masses. And it goes back to there. But it's the other interesting point about this is it came from the Secretariat of State, and that's unusual as well. This sort of thing should really come from the Archpriest of the Basilica, who's a new Cardinal Mauro Gambetti. But it came from the Secretariat of State, and it was an unsigned statement, so an unsigned letter. So there are all kinds of questions about this. I've asked the Holy See Press Office for some clarification. I've asked Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State. I've asked the Sostituto, who's supposed to have signed this document, Archbishop Edgar Pena-Parra, but none have responded, and there's been no clarification so far.
Interesting. Well, Ed, before I let you go quickly, do we know, are pilgrims able to go to Mass in the Basilica?
Yes, they can. As I say, if pilgrims come as a group with a priest or a bishop, they're able to celebrate Mass, but in the Vatican grottos. But they can also celebrate to participate in masses, which are set at set times in the Basilica. But those usually can celebrate it as well, or they have to be rather. And but they can go to those masses. Those masses are available at set times mostly in the morning, but also in the afternoon as well.
Edward Pentin, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thank you so much for your time, Ed.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, a closer look at the situation on the U.S.-Mexico border. One of Rome's main COVID-19 vaccination hubs was closed this morning due to the temporary suspension of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Italy is one of a number of countries in Europe suspending the vaccine as a cautionary measure over unconfirmed reports of an increased rate of blood clots among recipients. Rome's Termini Station vaccination hub stopped vaccinations until further notice. Belgium says it will continue to use the AstraZeneca vaccine. The country's COVID-19 Crisis Center spokesman says the country's decision to keep using AstraZeneca's vaccine is based on scientific advice. About 5.5 million doses have been used in the European Union. Similar to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine used abortion-derived cell lines in its production. Well, as we mentioned earlier in the newscast, concerns continue to grow over the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border. Just yesterday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, along with several other Republican lawmakers, traveled down to the border city of El Paso, Texas, to get a firsthand look for themselves. McCarthy saying in part, quote, "What is happening at the border is more than a crisis. This is human heartbreak." Joining us now to talk more about this is Melissa Lopez, attorney at law and executive director of Diocesan Migrant and Refugee Services in El Paso. Melissa, welcome, and thank you so much for your time today. Melissa, I know you're on the front line, so to speak, in El Paso. Tell us what you're seeing and what you're hearing.
We're just hearing terrible stories about how long people have been suffering trying to get into the United States, and just the lengths to which they will go to try and enter since the borders were closed under the prior administration.
And I know that your organization provides a wide range of legal assistance and services to immigrants, including help for unaccompanied minors. Let's talk a little bit more about that. On average, how many children do you help, and have you seen an increased need recently?
We typically help about 2,000 to 3,000 children a year. We provide various services to them. And right now, to be honest, the numbers have been down because of COVID-19. Precautions have to be taken. And so as a result, the numbers are slightly lower than usual.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you help these children with legal services?
Sure. So we will speak to them one-on-one. We try to discern what legal relief they're eligible for, and then we do everything possible to try and help them obtain that benefit here in the United States so that they can stay and don't have to return to these dangerous conditions in their home countries.
And I know that you also provide legal services for those who may have been victims of human trafficking, maybe some on their journey here to the U.S. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how prevalent that may be?
Unfortunately, human trafficking is very prevalent. The criminal element that take advantage of migrants regularly put them in situations that result in trafficking. And so it is one of the things that we regularly screen for. It's one of the questions that we ask everybody that we encounter. And when they're eligible, again, we will seek the legal benefits they qualify for as a result of that trafficking situation.
Can you talk a little bit, too, about the other ways that you help these immigrants coming into the country? I know you've been doing this for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we also, the big project that we're working on right now is trying to help individuals enter the United States who have been waiting in Mexico under the Migrant Protection Protocols program. We've been working collaboratively with our local partners to try and make sure that we can welcome them with dignity and the respect that they deserve, especially after having been stuck in Mexico for so long. And so we work really hard to make sure that they know that they're supported, that they're not alone, and that they have a friendly face to look to for the first time in some as long as 2 years.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I'm wondering, what would you like people to know about what's happening at the border and the people who are migrating here, and maybe how we can help?
Sure. I think the most important thing to remember is that this is not a new situation. During the Trump administration, these individuals were simply kept out of the country, were not even allowed to enter, even though they had a legal right to do so. I think what's really important is for individuals to provide financial support, quite frankly. In this time of COVID, resources are scarce, and so donations go a really, really long way to help us continue to serve.
Melissa, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Melissa Lopez, Executive Director of Diocesan Migrant and Refugee Services in El Paso, Texas. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Up next, amid the coronavirus pandemic, we hear how the Catholic schools in one diocese in Virginia are thriving. Finally tonight, earlier this week, the Catholic Diocese of Arlington, Virginia held a job fair in hopes of attracting and hiring 150 new teachers. The reason? There is so much demand from parents who want to send their children to the schools which have remained open during the pandemic. Officials also created a virtual program for students and teachers unable to return to in-person learning. And joining us now is Dr. Joseph Vorbach, Superintendent of Schools for the Catholic Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. Dr. Vorbach, welcome back. Thank you so much for coming on. So you need to hire 150 teachers. Well, that is quite a lot. Kind of give us an idea of the teachers that you're looking to hire. Is it elementary, middle school, high school, or does it run the gamut?
Sure. Well, we're always looking for talent, and it runs the gamut from preschool up to the high school level. And that virtual job fair was designed to make it easier for our schools to connect with potential teachers.
Also, talk to us about the protocols that you have in place, how you've been able to remain open during this pandemic when a lot of other schools weren't.
Well, we go back to last summer. Bishop Burbidge, our bishop, kind of gave us a broad vision, and we basically were trying to get back to in-person learning as soon as it was safe to do so. And the schools were charged with creating reopening plans that reflected the input of their stakeholders, their parents and their teachers. And they built those plans, and those plans cover a whole span of things that we've all become more familiar with now, but basically prudent safety and health risk mitigation strategies that start with what the families do at home. They start with the drop-off of children at school, the traffic patterns in the hallways, the distancing of desks, the use of masks all the time, air circulation in the building, frequent hand washing, and so on. Using cohorts is another, and all of those things put together. And obviously, when we entered into this in September, it was with a good amount of caution. And as things have gone on, we've certainly not grown comfortable, but grown to understand what needs to happen. And we've had great connections with our local public health authorities when it's been necessary to act on a particular case in a particular classroom. And so the schools have done a marvelous job. The teachers have been really heroic with their school administrators, too.
Yeah, tell us why it was so important to have the schools remain open for in-person learning from your perspective.
Sure, thank you. Going back to last spring, we learned a lot about our ability to shift to the online format when it was essential that we do so at that time. And lots of great things were done during that time period, and we learned a lot about technology and how to employ it better for those types of circumstances. But ultimately, the great takeaway was that this was not the best way to be conducting school. And from our perspective, looking at the whole child and our goals as in our Catholic mission, we really wanted to have the kids back together with one another, growing socially and emotionally, and to have those teachers in person with them where they can see the aha moments with their children and work with what they're seeing right before their eyes in terms of who needs what kind of support and so on. So all those things were part of what went into was really sort of driving us to get to that point last August, September.
Yeah, it really does certainly make a difference. What have you been hearing from parents and also maybe from students about that decision to remain open?
Sure. Well, it's been a real treat to be able to visit schools with Bishop Burbidge and on my own a little bit as well. And really, the first thing that the students say is that when they're home and they're in a virtual learning setting, it's much more easy to become distracted, and they really enjoy being back in school. And I think they've really they enjoy it for the reasons that we were just talking about: to be with one another, to see their teachers, to be part of a community. All of those things are critical. And the parents who have been essential to all this as well. In other words, without their cooperation in terms of all these extra strategies that have had to be in place, they've been very supportive of the schools, and that obviously has been essential to making this work.
Yeah, and one more thing before I let you go. I understand that there's a wait list now of students wanting to attend, which is kind of a good problem to have. When was the last time you saw this type of enrollment?
Well, each of the schools, one thing I should say is that some of our schools have to operate at slightly lower than ideal enrollment because of the mitigation strategies. That's one factor that's there. But clearly, there's been a lot of interest in the fact that the schools are offering in-person instruction, and that I don't know that we can point to a moment in time or to the variables that have caused it any time in recent history. What we have been trying to focus on, obviously, in the schools is for all those new folks who have joined the school communities, is to have that experience for them and for all the families in the school be affirming of their decision to seek Catholic education for their children. And the waiting lists, which are particularly long in some cases at some schools, reflect, I think, that desire that children be in person and learning, and also hopefully that the good word that's out there about the work that's been done in our schools.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us, and we really appreciate your time today. Dr. Joseph Vorbach, Superintendent of Schools for the Catholic Diocese of Arlington. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.